The Scottsboro Case, excerpted from The Tennessee, Volume 2, by Donald Davidson. The Scottsboro Case was the grimmest episode in Southern experience during the years between the two world wars. The whole thing began, appropriately enough, near the point where Rosecrans's army crossed the Tennessee for the Chickamauga campaign. The persons involved in the Scottsboro case, white and Negro, were of such low degree and were so ignorant that it seems possible they never understood the meaning of the imminent noises made over them from all quarters of the earth. Two white girls, Victoria Price and Ruby Bates, spent the night of March 25, 1931, at Chattanooga, and it was alleged that their bivouac was a hobo jungle. Next day, dressed in overalls with hair bobbed, they hopped a freight train for Memphis, where they said they were going to seek work. They rode in an open freight car, a gondola, 2/3 full of gravel. There was a group of white boys in this car, also hoboing. When the train crossed the Tennessee River and stopped in Stevenson, Alabama, about 20 Negroes, men and boys, got on. Some of the Negroes abusively challenged the white boys. A fight followed, in which the Negroes sought to chase the white boys off the train. The more numerous Negroes prevailed. They put the white boys off, all but one hapless wretch. He was about to fall to certain death between the cars, and a Negro, relenting, saved him. This white boy remained in the gondola, a helpless witness to what happened next. One of the white boys, who had been put off, bleeding and angry, telephoned the railroad station about what had happened, and the telegraph operator notified Paint Rock, on the line ahead, that there was trouble on the train. At Paint Rock, the county sheriff and a posse of deputies met the train and searched it. They arrested 9 Negroes. The other 11 escaped. The Negroes were put in jail at Paint Rock and were charged with rape. Word of the trouble quickly passed around the country, and a mob gathered, intent on a lynching. The Negroes were removed to Gadsden, and the lynching was prevented. The trial was set for April 6, 1931, at Scottsboro, county seat of Jackson County, where these incidents had occurred. Even in normal times, such an affair would have stirred the countryside. But the war of nerves that had beaten upon Southern sensibilities since the Dayton trial, or before, had brought the South to a condition of semi-belligerence, aggravated by the disorder of the economic depression that began in 1929. The uplanders of Jackson County, like uplanders elsewhere in the South, had an entrenched dislike of Negroes. They took the affair very personally and buzzed like hornets. Scottsboro, when the trial opened, did not repeat the carnival effects of Dayton. The Alabama National Guard was on duty. 10,000 people, reporters estimated, crowded into town. There were few outsiders among them, and no dignitaries from far away. The accused Negroes had difficulty in obtaining counsel. Only Milo C. Moody of the Jackson County Bar would touch the case. A Negro preacher named Stevens, who had gone to work on behalf of the accused, procured the services of a young Chattanooga lawyer, Stephen Roddy. Communist groups, already working in the South, were interested, but were slow in coming into effective action. At the trial, Victoria Price and Ruby Bates testified that they had been raped by the Negroes. Their testimony was supported by the white boy who had stayed on the train. 3 of the Negroes also said that they had seen other Negroes attack the girls. The jury found 8 of the Negroes guilty, and they were sentenced to death. One Negro, a 14-year-old boy, got off with a mistrial. The verdict was welcomed locally as if some battle had been won. There was open jubilation, and even, or so it was reported, triumphant playing by a band. But the Alabama people were much mistaken if they thought it was all over. A communist group, working from Chattanooga, began a determined campaign on behalf of the Negroes, who speedily became the Scottsboro Boys in the national press. The Communists were following the general instructions of the Seventh National Convention of the Communist Party of the United States, which had said, "Protest against the special oppression to which Negroes are subjected must take the form of intensive political campaigns and mass organization to fight against lynching. Negro workers and farmers persecuted on the basis of discrimination must be accepted and treated as class struggle victims." The campaign for the Scottsboro Boys followed this pattern skillfully. The trial was represented as a legal lynching, and the Scottsboro Boys were pictured as being persecuted. The Communists persuaded another Chattanooga lawyer, George W. Chamley, to join the defense. Much more important, however, was the entry of the International Labor Defense, which began its work by sending Judge Hawkins, then sitting on the case, a threatening telegram, in which the senders called the case a legal lynching and declared that they would hold him responsible. At this stage, Joseph Brodsky was the ILD's attorney. Mr. Roddy, displeased with the attitude of the ILD, finally retired from the case. Preacher Stevens became alarmed and solicited aid from the conservative National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Forthwith, the radical ILD and the conservative NAACP began to compete for the privilege of defending the Scottsboro Boys. The bewildered prisoners and their relatives were heavily importuned by the two groups. Both the ILD and the NAACP also campaigned in the South for Negro support and in the North for support at large. The campaign reached curious heights when the mothers of the Scottsboro Boys were transported about the nation to appear at rallies. There were not enough mothers to supply the demand, but the communist group did not hesitate to employ spurious mothers on occasion. The communists organized parades, demonstrated in Harlem with such vehemence that the New York police had to be called out, and even carried their agitation into foreign capitals. Motion for a new trial was denied, and the Scottsboro case went up to the Alabama Supreme Court, which affirmed the lower court's decision. Appeal to the United States Supreme Court resulted in an order for a new trial, on the ground that the defendants had not had adequate opportunity to secure counsel and prepare their case. This was only the beginning of a tedious series of retrials and appeals to the higher courts. A change of venue to Decatur, Alabama, was allowed for the retrials. W. W. Callahan finally supplanted James E. Horton as trial judge. Meanwhile, the burdens of the defense of the Scottsboro Boys passed to Samuel S. Leibowitz of New York, and he became, in the phrase of Time magazine, the Scottsboro hero. In the courtroom proceedings, Leibowitz devoted himself systematically to breaking down the evidence brought by the prosecution. The long continuance of the case, the successive trials which went over and over the same evidence, and the tremendous public pressure brought for the accused and against Alabama worked in his favor. The oftener the witnesses testified, the more confused and contradictory they became. Ruby Bates finally repudiated her sworn testimony. Outside the courtroom, and even to some extent within it, lawyer Leibowitz did not hesitate to make it clear, through various provocative utterances, that he had contempt for the courts and people of Alabama and of the South, and that he deemed himself a missionary appointed to rescue the persecuted from the baneful clutch of the heathen. In Decatur and New York, Leibowitz had a way of using such terms as lantern-jawed morons and lynchers when he referred to the people of Alabama. They and their fellow Southerners were, in his outspoken language, boll-weevil bigots, creatures whose mouths are slits, whose eyes pop out at you like frogs, whose chins drip tobacco juice, bewhiskered and filthy. "One can never tell," he said, "when one of those hillbillies will pump a 6-gun at him." The Alabama courts tolerated Leibowitz's impudence, and the boll-weevil bigots pumped no 6-guns at him. Though under extreme provocation, they proceeded with the forms of justice as they understood those forms. Except in one case in which Judge Horton declared a mistrial, the Alabama juries repeatedly found the defendants guilty, and the Alabama Supreme Court steadily upheld the lower courts. The United States Supreme Court refused to hear lawyer Leibowitz's last appeal. In August 1937, the case reached its end so far as courts were concerned. The state of Alabama, evidently tired of the long agitation, nolly processed the indictments against 4 of the Scottsboro boys and released them on condition that they leave the state. One defendant, Ozzie Powell, was tried and found guilty on a new charge, attacking a deputy. 2 others were held in prison under what amounted to a life sentence. Another was still under a death sentence, but he was not executed. Meanwhile, off and on during the years of the Scottsboro case, and especially during the period following the first trial, race relations passed from a state of high tension into open and widespread disorder. Negroes split into 2 camps, one radical, one conservative. In an article published in Harper's Magazine, Walter White, secretary of the NAACP, described the activities of communist groups among the Negroes and bewailed their violent tactics, which threatened, he indicated, to destroy the careful work done by his own organization. The admonition was needed. Exploiting the frenzy worked up by the Scottsboro case, the communists had brought Alabama to the point of a race war. White vigilantes watched the movement of Negro groups, and vice versa. Negro meetings were fired into and broken up, and the violence and intimidation of Reconstruction days threatened to return full scale. In the end, calmer counsels prevailed, or the more abundant promises of the New Deal distracted the attention of the belligerents. But again, as in the Dayton episode, permanent harm had been done. A way had been found, despite Edmund Burke's old pronouncement, to draw up an indictment against a whole people. The outside world denied Tennessee the right to govern its educational system in accordance with what was the evident will of its legislature and the probable desire of a heavy proportion of its people. The reason given was, in effect, that the legislature and the people were too ignorant to know what was good for them. To Alabama, that same outside world had said, by its clamors and insults, that the courts and the people of Alabama could not be trusted to execute justice for the Negro race. To lynch offending Negroes was damnable, as Alabamians and Southerners in impressive numbers were more than ready to agree. Could it be that it was also damnable to submit Negroes to due process of law in the regularly constituted courts of Alabama? The nation's verdict in the Scottsboro case and other cases seemed to indicate that such action also was damnable. They were damned if they did, and damned if they didn't. And just what were they expected to do? The specific attitudes engendered in the outside world by the exploitation of these cases might change, as time dulled the memory of the public and other sensations were provided by newspaper, radio, and movie. But there would remain, and did remain, an impression of Tennessee and Alabama and the Tennessee Valley that put the outside world in a condescending relation to them. The residue left by the Dayton trial and the Scottsboro case was the picture of Valley residents as ignorant, bigoted, backward, moronic, degenerate caricatures of humanity, who might, in their better moments, be quaint or picturesque, but could not be thought of as counting for much. Thus were decades of painful upward striving canceled at a blow. The reaction of Valley citizens toward their condition of pariahship was various. The more liberal group became more trenchantly liberal. They demanded more and bigger and more progressive colleges and schools, more industries, more labor unions, a general relaxation of old attitudes. The conservative group, less vocal, began to wonder whether they had been wise in making as great concessions as had already been made. They remembered the tales of their grandfathers, reread the history books, and began to resent the entire modern regime.